What is going on, football fans? Back at it with another New York Giants video. I will be live tonight. Wanted to go live last night. Wasn't able to do it, but I will be live tonight to field some of your guys' questions as we are getting closer and closer to the start of the regular season. Of course, the New York Giants went out there, made a big move yesterday, acquiring Logan Ryan. And now that the New York Giants have done that, I felt it was appropriate to finally make this video, my final 53-man roster prediction video, a couple days leading up until the Giants actually make the decision. A lot of you guys have asked me to do this video. Of course, the Giants may still go out there and acquire a free agent, and if they do that, that changes everything. But I did my best to estimate who the New York Giants will be picking. Now, the way I was able to do this was I looked at last year's roster, and I kind of used the same amount of players per position that the New York Giants selected. I made one minor adjustment based on the fact that I think the New York Giants may add an extra linebacker, looking at how they drafted in this year's draft. But we'll have to wait and see what Joe Judge decides to do. But I did my best. Like I said, you guys are probably going to disagree with some of the picks, but hopefully you guys enjoy it, and let's jump right into it. The first thing I wanted to do was just kind of look at how they broke down the roster last year in terms of per position. And if you look at it, the New York Giants last year went with obviously 3 quarterbacks. They went with 4 running backs. They went with 6 wide receivers. They went with 9 offensive linemen. They went with 3 tight ends and obviously 3 players for special teams. And I copied that to the T. I went with the same amount of players per position on this year's roster with the New York Giants. The defense, I made a minor adjustment. They went with 5 defensive linemen. I stayed the same there. And I added an extra linebacker. They went with 9 linebackers last year and 11 DBs. I went with 10 and 10. So that was the only adjustment that I made for this year's roster. Other than that, I kept it by the same format. So let's jump right into my 53-man roster. All right, guys, so this is how I broke it down. Obviously, like I said, I went with 3 quarterbacks, much like they did last year. I went with, of course, Daniel Jones, who is, of course, the New York Giants starter. Colt McCoy, the veteran backup, who we brought in here on a pretty cost-effective contract. And the third quarterback, well, I got Alex Tanney getting cut. I got Cooper Rush making the team. Obviously, the main reason for that, Cooper Rush is a guy that I think could help Daniel Jones with this playbook, being that he played with the Dallas Cowboys and Jason Garrett for the last couple of years in Dallas. I think he's been in the league now for about 3 years. So that's the reason I went with Rush. I think that's the reason that Dave Gettleman and the New York Giants brought him in. In terms of the running back, the New York Giants, of course, just cut Javon Leake. It led me to believe that they'd go with 4 running backs, the same number they went with last year. Maybe they go with 5, but there's only so many spots on a roster. So my 4 running backs, of course, Saquon Barkley and Elijah Penny, the starting fullback, and I think the Giants will be using a lot more I formation this year. Wayne Gallman and Dion Lewis, I kind of view them as kind of an almost even split as the backups. I don't really expect either one to be getting more than 5, maybe 6 touches a game. But I do think that they both will make the team. Wayne Gallman has stood out at camp. It looks as if Joe Judge is impressed with him. He had that nice 43-yard touchdown run. Dion Lewis has looked decent as well, according to all reports. And, we brought him in on a cost-effective contract. I think it was $1.5 million. He's got familiarity with Judge. I think that's a big reason why he's here. The former Patriot comes over to the New York Giants. In terms of the wide receivers, I know a lot of you guys are going to say, well, why didn't you put this guy and why didn't you put that guy on? Benjamin Victor's a very popular guy. He could easily make the team. I'm going based off of what I've read at camp, how players have stood out. And I went with 6. They could easily go with 7. I ended up going with 6 wide receivers, the same number they went with last year. Sterling Shepard, Golden Tate, Darius Slayton are givens. Those are your 3 starters. Corey Coleman has played fantastic. I mean, you look at the last scrimmage, he really stood out. He's definitely going to make this team, in my opinion, and I expect him to be returning kicks. The last 2 were tough, like I said, because they brought in so many players, and I could be completely wrong. But I went with David Sills, the undrafted free agent from last year, who has really stood out, and I do think he's going to make this team. He's a tall threat in the red zone. He had 33 combined touchdowns over his last 2 years at West Virginia. And I went with Alex Bachman. He's been getting a ton of great write-ups. I've seen a couple of people compare him to Victor Cruz. Not that I expect that at all, but seems to be a versatile wide receiver that you can move inside and out, and a guy that is really impressed at camp that I actually think stands a very good chance to make the final roster for the New York Giants. The tight end was pretty cut and dry. I think they're definitely going with 3 tight ends, especially when you factor in the same number as last year, but especially when you factor in the number of 2 tight end sets that I expect the New York Giants to run. Levine Toilolo may be slightly on the bubble based on some of the things that I read, but in the end, I do think he makes the team. He hasn't been great in training camp, but he is known to be a blocker. They could use him at the goal line as a receiving option at 6'7". Caden Smith and Evan Ingram are obviously givens. I think Ingram will thrive in this offense this year, and if he does go down, I expect Caden Smith to do the same thing. Caden Smith had great chemistry with Daniel Jones last year, very good blocker. So that's how I see the skill positions. In terms of the offensive line, I went with the same number, and like I said, you could insert somebody at the end, but I do think they'll go with 9, same as last year. Andrew Thomas, the rookie left tackle, Will Hernandez, Nick Gates, Kevin Zeitler, and Cam Fleming are my projected starters. Maybe Matt Barrett gets that job over Fleming. Fleming did not look too well at the last scrimmage. We'll see if he does get that opportunity, but I definitely have Matt Barrett making the roster, along with the other rookie, Shane Lemieux. Now, they did bring in Jalapeno for a look, so it's possible maybe he cracks this as well. Spencer Pulley, though, is my backup center, and I went with Kyle Murphy mainly due to the fact that I've read that he's very versatile, and you could play him in a number of spots on the line, the undrafted free agent that the New York Giants brought in. So those are my 9 offensive linemen. In terms of the defensive line, I think the top 4 are obvious. That's Leonard Williams, Dalvin Tomlinson, Dexter Lawrence, and B.J. Hill. That is the strength of this defense. We're pretty strong up front after the acquisition of Leo. I think he'll fit very well in this scheme. Dalvin Tomlinson will be our primary nose tackle. Did a great job last year for the New York Giants, particularly once Leonard Williams got here. Dexter Lawrence, I think by year's end, may end up being the best player on this Giants defense. I'm in love with Big Dex, and I think he's going to have a great year. B.J. Hill, hopefully he gets a little bit more playing time this year. Showed great flashes in his rookie year in which he had 5.5 sacks. And Austin Johnson I went with as the 5th player on the defensive line. Well, the reason being, he's got familiarity at Penn State with Coach Chaos. I think that's a major reason why they brought him in. He's a former second-round pick of the Tennessee Titans. So there's my 5 defensive linemen. At the linebacker position, I kind of just mixed it all together in terms of pass rushers and middle linebackers. And this is an estimate, but you know, a lot of the guys at the top are obvious guys that are going to make this team, that being O'Shane Ximines, Lorenzo Carter, Kyler Fackrell, Marcus Golden. I think all 4 of those are givens, and they will be our primary edge rushers. I think they'll pretty much be a near even split between those 4. Fackrell was a really nice free agent acquisition that the Giants brought in. They got Golden back on the cheap, which a lot of people didn't expect. But Carter and Ximines will be the X factors in terms of the edge rushers for me. Both of them have a lot of upside, and hopefully they can mold into it. I'll skip Coughlin for a second. Blake Martinez is a given. Mayo I put on the list because from what I heard, he could be back in 3 weeks. I don't think he'll be put on the injured list. If he is, well, obviously this list would change. Carter Coughlin I put on. He's not a given, but I did have him making the roster. I think he could be a contributor in special teams and may get an opportunity if somebody goes down with an injury, but I don't expect him to see much of the field, especially after they brought back Marcus Golden. Cam Brown, the rookie, with a lot of upside, but I still think he needs to put on 15, maybe 10 to 15 pounds of muscle. Could be a special teams contributor. Devontae Downs may very well be your opening day starter in the middle next to Blake Martinez. He's had a fantastic training camp. I've got him making this roster, and Ryan Conley, who's kind of been sitting out nursing injuries, but I do think he's way too talented not to make this team. So there is my 10 linebackers. The 10 DBs, well, James Bradbury, obviously, given our biggest free agent acquisition this year, and definitely the guy we trust the most at the corner position. Jabril Peppers, obviously, our best safety. Logan Ryan, the newly acquired safety / cornerback / slot corner from the Tennessee Titans and formerly of the New England Patriots, with Joe Judge, who we're all really excited about. Darnay Holmes, I think, stands a very good chance to be that starting slot corner out of UCLA. The rookie has performed great this entire offseason, and I definitely think he's going to make this team. Same for Julian Love. He's making the team out of Notre Dame, the second-year pro, who's a fan favorite. A lot of people want to make sure he gets playing time. Corey Ballantyne, I think, is definitely going to make this team. I'd be surprised if he doesn't, due to the fact that we don't have a lot of exterior corners, and he does have a little bit of, he definitely has upside. The guy was a standout at his combine, very athletic, but he did struggle last year. Nate Ebner is a given. He's going to make the team due to his special teams contributions and be a backup safety. Chris Williamson, the rookie 7th-round pick, I expect to make this team, along with Javon Askew-Henry out of the XFL, the free agent acquisition, and Grant Haley, who, of course, was our starting slot corner last year, did just crack my roster. And then finally, the special teams. Well, the New York Giants brought in a former Pro Bowl long snapper who will be replacing Zach Diassi, Casey Kreider, Riley Dixon, the punter, and Graham Gano, who's performed great so far in training camp. So there you have it. There are my predictions for the New York Giants' final 53-man roster. Like I said, you guys probably won't agree with every single pick, but I tried to do it as fair as I could. I broke it down off of last year's decisions in terms of the players per position that make this team, outside of that small adjustment where I added an extra linebacker and took away an extra DB. A guy like Chandler, for example, is a guy who just missed it at the DB spot for me. There was a number of other guys, a couple of offensive linemen I could have put in instead of Kyle Murphy, and I already talked about the wide receivers. Other than that, I think it's pretty cut and dry as to who will make this team. Tate Crowder definitely could make it at the linebacker spot as well, but then you'd have to take away one of those guys because you're not carrying 11 linebackers. At least, I don't think so. So we'll have to wait and see what Joe Judge and Dave Gettleman decide to do with this roster as we get down to cut-down day, but that's my prediction. I guess we'll see how close I get. As always, guys, if you liked what you watched, please subscribe, drop a comment, maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.